This is Dr. David Proden, and I want to thank you as we begin another journey into school and community safety. If you're looking for industrial safety expert, Appalachian State University professor Dr. Timothy Ludwig, please visit www.safety-doc.com. Again, that's Dr. Timothy Ludwig at www.safety-doc.com.
Welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast with author, radio host, and nationally recognized safety expert, Dr. David Proden. Join us each week as we discuss the best and most bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. Follow Dr. Proden on Twitter at SafetyPhD. And remember, the truth will keep you safe.
Hi, everyone. This is Dr. David Proden, and welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast. I have with me today John Steele, and we are going to talk about escaping Seattle. That's where John lives. He's been considering, after 24 years there, of possibly leaving the city because of some changes that have happened. So we want to talk about situational awareness, and then also what would be the tipping point for leaving a location, and then what would be the criteria for moving to a different location, and just a fascinating life that John has. He hosted an authors roundtable. I was able to listen in on it. Ann Sturzinger, TJ Martinell, and others, nonfiction authors. It was fabulous. First of all, John Steele can be found at John, John _ Steele, Steele 99 on Twitter, or you can go to the John Steele Show on YouTube, and you'll see a sword. You found it. That's John Steele. John, welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast.
Thank you, David, for having me on. It's a pleasure. Yeah, like you said. By the way, it's not the John Steele Show. That might be something else. It's just John Steele Show.
Okay.
On YouTube. But thank you for having me on. And I think first, this show is ultimately about safety, and you said you wanted to talk about escaping from Seattle. Well, the interesting thing is I ended up in Seattle. Some people might be able to tell from my accent, by originally escaping from New York. So that's how I ended up in Seattle. I wanted to get out of New York City.
Okay.
I grew up in New York, and the neighborhood was never a good neighborhood, but it had gotten really, really bad.
Oh.
And I'm talking crack cocaine on my corner bad.
24 years ago, you're talking about that.
Yeah, this was before Giuliani came in and cleaned it up.
Wow.
So it was really bad, and I had to get out of there, and it was a bad place. And the reason I lived there because my mother moved out, and I inherited a rent control of an apartment. So it was cheap, and
yeah, absolutely.
And I had a roommate, and but I had to get out of there, and I was thinking, moving to a nice area of New York was prohibitively expensive for someone who was 24 at that time. I mean, well, probably even worse now, right? So I had a girlfriend, an ex-girlfriend who I kept in touch, I was friendly with, who was working out here in Seattle, and I visited her. And just kind of fell in love with the city, and also just fell in love with how inexpensive everything was. And that was really, how it all started. And, and then the rest is kind of history as far as how I got here.
So when you talk about Seattle and inexpensive, those two things are incompatible today. Because when you moved there, I know you had mentioned on a different show the cost of your condo, which, I mean, you don't have to reveal, but just this massive appreciation in property value in the 24 years that you've been there, to the point where anyone coming there today, if they're 24 years old, it's really prohibitive unless you've got some, giant jackpot of money to put down. It's a city that's inaccessible to most young people or young families.
That's true. It really has changed. I mean, I'll talk about the numbers. I mean, I bought my place, and like you said, this 24 years ago, but I bought my place, really lovely place I live in, for $151,000 for a 2-bedroom condo with the huge 500 square foot deck and view of the water and downtown. And, that now, and then my place now is worth about, I mean, like you said, it's been 24 years, but it's worth $600,000.
Yes.
So that's a big jump, but it's kind of an artificial price because you're having all these people move here because, the tech companies, Amazon and things like that. So the city has experienced a huge amount of growth, and there's just a shortage of housing. So eventually that bubble is going to burst. So we'll see.
So right now, and let's get in a little bit back into New York. When you were in New York, you were studying security management. I'm correct?
Correct. Yeah. Okay. Correct.
So fits right in here with the safety doc. So you have this already heightened situational awareness of your environment, ways to stay safe, and things like that. But obviously, some things have happened. You had your car, stolen. The car, which you did everything. You took care of it many years and came out and it was gone. But it sounds like, again, from listening to you on some other shows, that there's been this progressive and maybe accelerating deterioration of the societal factors that made Seattle a place that you moved to. So if you can share that.
Yeah, what I've noticed, I think you wanted to talk about how it's, seeing it over, almost a quarter century, what's happened to the city. There's been this huge amount of growth, and I don't want to give people the wrong impression that Seattle is a violent place. There's been a huge uptick in crime, but it's not, murders per capita increase per se. It's theft and vandalism, like things like graffiti, for example. Like when I was, growing up in New York, graffiti used to be everywhere. And then, I'm talking about pre-Giuliani days, anyone who knows the older people listening. And then, that was one of the things I loved about when I moved out here. It was just so beautiful and it was clean, and, people here didn't really, this is before everybody started to move here. And the only company that was really here at the time was Microsoft, and they were big then, but they weren't. This is before Windows came out. People were still using DOS, So it was a long time ago. And what has happened now is that there has been a huge uptick in kind of like break-ins and theft and burglaries, larcenies, and also there's been this huge growth in the homeless population, and which is probably the main cause of that, because the majority of the people who are homeless are mentally ill and or substance abusers. So they're feeding their addiction, and how are they going to do it? Well, they don't have jobs, right? They can't,
Right.
So they steal. And I was, like you said, a victim at my car, which, we joked about in other podcasts because it was an 18-year-old car, so people were kind of laughing, what you do, 18-year-old. Well, it was the longest relationship I ever had. And I bought it new, so and it was an awful thing when the car was recovered back. The cops had to impound it because it was filled up with stolen merchandise from other burglaries they had used it for after they stole it from me. And the police officer said, you're going to have to get this professionally detailed because I don't know if we got up all the IV drug needles that were in the car. So
did you come out with like video games or something that they left in the trunk or something that you tried to sell and get a little money off of? Or
I contacted the police about it. I said, you left a bunch that were in the trunk, because they stole everything out of the car. The thieves did, like even the jack and the donut tire.
Really? Oh wow.
Yeah. Oh, even the headrest. They even stole the headrest. There's no headrest in the car. They really did a number on it. Anything that was possible, they stole out of it. And of course, when you own a car for that long, you had a lot of other things in the car as well, and they were all gone, my tools and everything. And so that was all gone. But one of the things that the police, for some reason, left a bunch of video games that obviously they had stolen from, and the cop was like, there was so many things to charge me. He goes, you could just keep them. He said. So I don't play video games personally, so I just took them to one of those, game store places and then sold them for, I think they gave me, $10 or something for them, whatever. But it was just kind of funny.
Oh, wow. In the infrastructure in a city like Seattle, is it something where the infrastructure is completely overwhelmed and it takes you, an extra hour now to get from one place to another?
Well, it does. There's certain choke points in Seattle, which during rush hour times, the infrastructure wasn't designed to handle that. And there's a lot of oddities moving to Seattle. For example, you're not allowed to drive your car downtown on the main, like I think First and Second Avenue. Only buses or public transit is allowed down there. I mean, you literally can't even drive. So that's the way they deal with it. They have done some interesting things with the infrastructure. I mean, they've redone roads and trying to make it better, but there are certain choke points. There's this thing called the Mercer Mess in Seattle. Anyone in Seattle will know what that is, and I live right near there. And they've also, like the main arterial that I live on, it used to have 3 lanes, a northbound, a southbound, and a turning lane. Well, they decided to get rid of the turning lane and because they wanted to put in bike lanes.
Okay.
So they took this main arterial and then they put out those island bus stations, bus stops.
Yeah.
So that means every time the bus stops, all the cars have to stop behind the bus.
Yes.
So the traffic just goes, gets awfully backed up there. So I try to, fortunately I usually work from home a lot, and so when I do drive, I try to drive off hours because it is really rough driving during rush hour here. That is something that has gotten, has just keeps getting worse and worse. And another thing about Seattle, unlike New York, which was different, is in Seattle everybody owns at least one car, usually 2. So
yeah,
it's it's bad. Everybody drives here, so that's a problem.
So when you're driving around the city, so to prepare for the show, I was watching some documentaries about homeless in Seattle and some of I guess the urban issues as seen through the positionality of the filmmakers. But are you seeing this kind of sprawling out into urban areas? Is it more concentrated? Is it showing up on street corners? I guess what are you seeing? And then again, you mentioned John, at least once before, that you did have a point where you were considering, is this where I'm going to stay? Am I going to stay here or am I going to go somewhere else? So what is starting to change, or what is changing rapidly, which is making you surface those thoughts?
Yeah, well, Dave, you're right. I have been considering that. And to answer your first question about the homelessness, the city has pretty much, what's the expression, non-enforcement when it comes to removing these homeless encampments. They're allowing them to set up shop almost anywhere. And so they've gone, so you pretty much find one in every green space in the city to some degree. You'll find some sort of homeless, some sort of homeless encampment. But now they're even having them, like there's one on Denny Way, which is a main arterial in Seattle, where there's kind of like a like a triangle in the street where the weird streets kind of do a thing, and they have to have like a triangle island kind of a thing. Yeah. There's literally a miniature homeless encampment there. I mean, that's how bad it is. And I actually have a friend of mine who is a King County sheriff's deputy. And he was telling me that they have been instructed that if they see a homeless person like shooting up, in the camp, they're told to stand down, not do anything, just ignore. So that's how bad it is, and it's getting worse, and it's going to keep getting worse because there's no incentive for these people. I mean, they're actually incentivizing them to remain homeless and do it. So it's counterintuitive. They're saying they want to help these people, but they're really not. I mean, if you're not helping an alcoholic by buying them free booze, are you? I mean, right.
Right, because in comparison, in San Francisco, I believe it was something like 500,000 needles a year, and then that program has increased of giving these needles out. So the heroin and whatever people injecting had clean needles, and then they were having 20% recycled, and the rest were ending up all over the streets and the waterways and so forth. And now that program has increased to more needles and actual sites where people can go indoors, and there's like a certified nursing assistant there, staffed by the city, to, I don't know, administer the Narcan or whatever, or to monitor if there's an overdose or something. But yeah, it's that same argument has come up in discussions, obviously, in these documentaries of San Francisco, saying, what are we really doing here? I mean, we're just going to keep precipitating this, and of course, people know that, okay, if Seattle's not going to enforce this, or other cities are going to gravitate to these locations. So what does it mean, like, culturally, and just things that you used to do that you're like, yeah, I'm just not going to do that anymore. Well, like, I guess biking or hike, or running, or just like hanging out in a park or things like, I mean, just stuff you're like, yeah, nah. No.
Well, one of the things I do like to do, at least in the summertime, is there's a beautiful park called Green Lake. I always loved it. It's about a 3-mile around walk, so it's just kind of a perfect distance. You can jog it as well. I no longer jog, and even when I jogged, I was kind of a treadmill guy anyway, because Seattle with the weather. But that has turned into a big homeless encampment. Parts of it have. So even there, you're reminded of it. Now, as far as hiking, that's kind of something that you drive, you get out of the city to do.
Sure.
So that hasn't really affected me. That's something you could do a drive. You can, there's all sorts of great hiking trails. You can go do it on the Olympics, or you can go to the Cascades, depending which direction you want to go. So that's still fortunate, unaffected by this. As far as how it's affected me, well, one thing I do notice is, like, I guess, I'm reflecting on that question. It's deeper than you think it is. I think I've bunkered in a lot more than, I don't socialize as much. Now, part of that is just getting older. You got to realize, when I came here, I was in my early 20s. So, of course, when you're in, your early 20s, you're going to be going out all the time,
right,
and socializing. And then when you get into your upper 40s, well, you don't do that as much,
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. So.
Yeah. Well, so, you just don't do it as much. You don't get, I mean, kind of like Friday comes now, you're like, going out on Fridays on, I want to, I'm tired, man. I was, I was up early. When you were in your 20s, you're like, man, I'm gonna hit the gym, and then I'm gonna shower, and I'm gonna go out, and I'm gonna, but now it's like, geez, I don't know where I had that energy, So you just, I don't socialize as much. But one of the things I do notice is how, like, I remember in the 90s, there was a neighborhood called Belltown. Belltown was actually listed as one of the top 10 trendiest neighborhoods in the entire country, and now Belltown has turned into, I've actually seen people shooting up in alleyways and parking lots in Belltown in daylight, in daytime, not even at night. Just when I was going down there, because there's stores and stuff like that. And, just seeing that, and it just turns you off. It makes you not want to be around, you want to avoid those areas. Right. So you just, because just seeing that is just, what's the word? It's like seeing something ugly. You just want to turn your head from it. It's just nasty.
Oh yeah.
Seeing people destroy themselves, and also seeing people have such blatant disregard for societal norms.
Yes.
Just doing, you know what I mean? If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that was something that was not, that has really changed, because you wouldn't see things like that, years past.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perodin, author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
No, it's probably going to be different. I mean, being a man versus a woman in a city like that. But, I mean, do you ever just have a heightened awareness of your own personal safety when you're walking through areas? Because one of the things I've picked up from some other people, like in more or less California, more aggressiveness from people who are homeless, and then also comorbid mental illness or comorbid reaction to, some type of drug, which is, rat poison and heroin mixed together, something like that. So, I mean, again, and I think you're very respectful in we're not here to trash the homeless, but
yeah, I'm not denigrating these
right.
people per se, and it's a multi-vector problem, like you said. It's a combination of substance abuse. A lot of these people came from family dysfunction, and then mental illness on top of it, and then that was left to fester, and then this is what you get. Yeah.
And then what's happening is this reaction where people are becoming just much more aggressive. And that's been documented in Florida just recently, also, in Miami, and just saying people driving through with cars. I mean, that they're being approached at stoplights, or they're being, kind of chased down. And it's just largely attributed to this hybrid of drug. I mean, that the drugs are not as pure as they used to be. And then also, I think just the frequency that people are injecting. So have you heard stories about this when you're out there? Like a friend or somebody, says, I was down by whatever and I got chased by, like for half a block, or I had to take off, or, I really am starting to wonder, I'm only going to kind of shop between whatever and whatever. And as soon as the street lights are on, I'm out of there and stuff like that. I mean, do the people you work, with, interact with, share these stories?
Well, I'll give you an example. I don't know if it completely falls in line with what you're saying, but after my car was robbed, I went and I had to buy a new car, and I had only had it for a few days, and I was actually driving down Aurora, which is another main arterial, and there was a homeless guy that was drunk and or high. I mean, I know he was drunk because he was drinking out of a paper bag, and he literally walked in the middle of the street as I missed him by inches.
Wow. Just
walked, and he was cursing, and I don't know, not specifically at any one person. And, the only way I knew, I mean, it was almost like a optical illusion. Like it looked like I hit him. I mean, the reason I know I didn't, because I didn't feel it or anything like that, but it was
right.
that close. And he was just like, I don't give an F, kind of a walking around in the street. And I had saw him at the light ahead of me, because I saw this guy in the street, but he was kind of teasing about walking out right into the middle of the street. And then as I started driving, he actually did. And it was close. I mean, I nearly ran the guy down and ruined my brand new car. Yeah.
Wow.
So that kind of thing I'm seeing. Now, as far as personal things that happened to me, I mean, you got to understand, I did grow up in New York in a rough area.
Yes.
So I always, as a kid, I always kind of had a strong situational awareness about things, and I always was very cognizant of my environment and, perceiving threat levels. And you probably have studied this. If you study victimology, you'll know people who are aware of this on an unconscious level and things like that. And people also, homeless people included, they unconsciously know the difference between predator and prey. So they will pick up on signals about people that they look like easy targets and people who do not look like easy targets.
Right.
So I guess because I, give up, plus I'm kind of a bigger guy, I'm over 6 feet tall,
Yeah.
I don't, if I was a 5'2" woman, it would be different. But even a woman, if you look like you are walking with a purpose, where you're going, you're not just, you're less likely to to attract the predators, and there's a whole science based on this. I know you're aware of it.
Yeah, actually, I interviewed early in this podcast, I think right around podcast 15, a man who was blind from birth and became, early in his career, a door-to-door salesman and went through training on how to, walk with authority in any neighborhood. And for the very fact of, you're much less likely to be victimized. So that was one thing he had practiced, and he had done early in his career. Actually, he worked at one point, just as an aside, he worked at one point in a prison, and he talked about when they had fire drills, he had to get his guide dog up a ladder and out a window onto like this balcony area, which then went to another ladder where they could go down into a safe area. So I mean, it's just kind of crazy. But
this guy's impressive, and he did all this blind. Yeah, this is...
yeah, and he still works today, actually, helping family and youth, and I have a lot of respect. But the stories are amazing. He also, I mean, just as an amazing story, he tells of a convention of people who are blind, and I don't know what the city was like, 25 years ago. And there was, again, like a reason to evacuate the hotel or whatever, and they became talking signposts. So every 10 feet there would be somebody, and then they would say like, A, B, C, D, and people would just kind of go down the line. I didn't even know any of this stuff, but amazing. And so, okay, so how close is this coming geographically towards you? Well, what are the factors that have you thinking, or, that had brought you to churning, I don't know if I want to stay here. Is it, my property value is possibly peaking because my neighborhood is in a threshold area, or is it, there's just, I want to live out where, I guess what is it? Because something has brought you to a point where you batted that decision around.
Yeah, well, I think like most big decisions, it's usually not just one thing, right? It's a convergence of several different factors. One is purely financial. Like I think that I could be wrong on this because you're trying to guess the top of a market. You'll never know. But I'm thinking, there's comes to a point where how much money are people going to pay for an apartment, for God's sake? Right. And so I look at that. I says, wow, I could cash in there, and also the quality of life. But there's an interesting thing because in many ways, in many ways things are very easy, very convenient. Like, we were talking before the show about, my headphones broke for this, right before the show. And I was working, and but then I knew my headphones, I couldn't leave to go out and buy them. I actually ordered them, and Amazon actually delivered them to me in an hour. So there are certain conveniences you have living here that, things like that. If I were to move to, let's say, our buddy TJ Martinell, who lives in, the Cascade Mountain Range, that wouldn't be an option. If he'd have to get in his car and drive for an hour and a half and then an hour and a half back, to do something like that. So there, and then you kind of get to this other thing where it's like, where do you want to go? Like, are you going to keep running? Because eventually you kind of run out of places to go. So what I probably will do is stay within the state and sell my place and just downsize, become even more minimalist than I already am. Because I think in some of we've been on streams together and stuff, and I think we've talked about minimalism. We have a mutual friend, Aaron Cleary, and I've done a lot of, I keep my life very minimalist. I don't watch television or anything like that. I got the cheapest cell phone plan you can have. When I have a car, I have it for 18 years or until someone steals it. That's kind of the way I live my life. And I recommend people do that just in general. That's, and also, because it's a safety thing, and part of overlapping as safety is, loss prevention, and I'm sure you have to deal with that as well in your profession. But the less valuable, there comes a point where the things you own end up owning you, so. Oh, absolutely.
A few shows ago, I had an interview with Charles Mack, who works with IT, University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And we talked for a while about side hustles of economic viability because he has a side hustle of selling sports memorabilia on eBay. And it is one of those things where he would subscribe as we would to a minimalist lifestyle, and making sure that he had these additional revenue streams and that money was being put aside in case something did happen, and then to the primary stream, and then also the fact that it gives him options down the road to, retire or to go into different, career options where maybe he's not working as much or something to that effect. And I think economic safety is something people completely overlook, and I've gone into this a few times on some podcasts, and I mean, from little on, I was very aware of what was in my savings account, and I wasn't not like a lot, but I mean, if I was mowing lawn for my neighbors and had my lawn business, eventually worked at a concrete factory when I was like 12 and stuff like that, and these side hustles, and kind of even today. And I remember I was telling my wife this story the other day, because we replaced the the carpet in our bedroom, we've been here 15 years. The house was built in 79, and we had updated pretty much everything in the house, but I was just updating my girls' rooms first and some other things, and then finally we got rid of this carpet. But I was telling her, I said, you know what? I remember my grandfather would always say, like, this is the last car I'm getting. This is the last pair of boots I'm getting. This is the last, whatever. And he was pretty right with that. I mean,
Yeah.
And I have, today I actually picked up 2 pairs of shoes from Dan the Shoe Man. I had a pair of running shoes where the fronts wore out, and then Dan does a really nice job matching up a piece of leather that kind of looks similar to the shoe, so you can't really tell. And then the backs of my dress shoes, which I had for like 20 years, were starting to wear. So just, instead of like buy a new ones, my wife's like, I'm like, no, these are fine. Dan will take care of them. But, I'm looking at some of that stuff, and I'm like, I'm going to have this stuff probably forever. I mean, because I'll take care of it. I have no need, to upgrade anything, like, I'm, kind of like, but I bought a lawnmower, like that lawnmower is going to last forever. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
I bought it when I got here, and it's still good to this day. And, throw a new blade on and just change the oil and, the air filter to do the maintenance, stuff like that. But just take care of things. Car is 11 years old and stuff like that. But I think, these stories just drive me crazy when I see, like, person, 28-year-old, $80,000 in debt. And then the thing, I had no idea that, no one explained what it was to take out a student loan and this other stuff. God.
Compounding interest. Yeah. What did I do?
There's nobody that knows that. Anyone that, but, so you would take, obviously you sell your condo. Are you looking to move to an area, that's like really rural, like a 1,000 people or 50,000, or what do you have?
No, I couldn't do that for a couple of reasons. One purely psychologically. I mean, you have to understand I was born and raised in the largest city in the country, right?
Yes.
So, and then Seattle, which is now a huge city, but even then it was still when I first moved here, it was well over 1 million people. I mean, it was a big city. So I couldn't, and I'm single. So no, it's different when you're married, because if you're a single guy, you need to meet people of the opposite sex occasionally. So
Right.
at least I do. Hopefully. So maybe there'll come an age where I don't care about that, but right now it is. So I couldn't live in a totally rural area, like that wouldn't work for me. And also I do need. It's gonna be really tough if I move. Like I said, it'll probably be where I end up just moving, like an hour drive from Seattle. So if I ever do want to experience the high culture, the symphony, the opera, the concerts, or something like that, it's not totally unfeasible to do so. It'd be 45-minute an hour drive in a car or something. So I think that's probably what I'll end up doing. I don't know, but I haven't decided yet, but that's probably what I'll do.
So what do you think is your soft timeline? By the time you're age 50, or
I don't. I really don't know because one of the reasons is the building I'm living in right now, where it's going to be undergoing renovations, so we don't have a hard timeline on that. So I probably will sell that after the it's going to be reskinned, the exterior of the building, so it would be after that. So I don't know how long that's going to take. So I actually spoke with a Redfin representative, came over here to. Anyone who's interested, if you own property and you live in an area that Redfin services, they'll come over to your house and give you free appraisals and everything, and totally give you an idea of what your place is worth if anyone's interested in that. But yeah, so so I have, I'm seriously looking about it. I'm doing the math, but the challenge is if I get this big lump sum of money and I don't have a mortgage, my mortgage is paid off. So that's after the taxes, I get to pocket and commission. I get to pocket all the money,
right?
But then what do I do with it? Like, well, do I buy another place? Do I rent? You know what I mean? So there's all these other challenges you have, and then also just living in the same place for a long time. There is overcoming the psychological inertia of being somewhere.
Yeah, I can imagine. We've been here 15 years, and it's kind of a split distance between my parents and also my wife's mom. Her dad had passed away years ago of a heart attack. But we've talked because I'm looking, at kind of stopping like the full-time work within the next year or two, and then just keeping the safety consulting, which has actually grown, quite substantially. I mean, just over time, it's a weird thing.
Congratulations on your success, brother. No, sincerely. I mean, it's great what you've done. You've really found your niche, and it's really taken off for you.
Yeah, and John, actually, I have a book that is due September 11th to my publisher, and it's done. Working. Right.
I think I know the editor.
Yeah, I have an awesome
mutual friend of ours. Yeah.
I have an awesome editor, and honestly, So I 2 years ago I had an agent, and the agent was residual because I worked on a Hollywood a movie, and I was brought in to be a content expert on some safety things. Like with this, the questions in some scenes, how would this actually play out? And so I would say this would be like this, or this person wouldn't say this, or they have to be repositioned, or when the police arrive, this is what it would look like, and which was just purely because I was another person that knew me, and some consulting I did out in California just brought my name up at a meeting and said, well, here's a guy, and so I got contacted by like this guy's person, and then we had a meeting and stuff like that, and everything worked out. Actually, it worked out so well. Like, I wrote part of the script with him, but.
Oh, great! Yeah.
He was also an agent at that time and got out of it. An agent, not Asian, but you could be an Asian agent.
Agent.
Yes. And he kind of helped me get the pathway to the publishing house, which is, I've talked about this, Rowman and Littlefield. So it's a well-regarded publishing house, same tier as University of Wisconsin Press, for example, and. I proposed a book to them, basically saying the 9/11 harbor rescue of 500,000 people was more about psychology than it was about mechanics, because there were books that came out like American Dunkirk and things like this, which did very well, talked about the harbor rescue and the tug captains. And I said, yeah, that's part of it, but I'm like, there's a lot more involved with this. So I took like this transference dynamic and I wrote this big proposal, and I analyzed other books and studies, and they liked it, and they gave me a contract with an advance. And this was one of the things too. So they put the money out there, and I said to my wife, I'm like, I'm not taking the money. I'll have them hold it in escrow because I don't know how committed I'm going to be to writing this book.
Yeah, you're like, what did I get myself into here? Kind of
one of those things. Like once you accept the money, then and it wasn't a situation where I needed the money. But it was really, I was very dedicated to this book and this position, and I had worked with, a lot of experts around the country, so I knew it was on base with what I was saying. So I got a lot of it done the first year, 2 years ago, and then I just took a year off. Like I was burned out because, it's one of those things that's toxic. When you do safety like this, and I work with, the sheriff's department and things, and there is a point where and you've probably experienced this too in security management, where you just got to walk away from it just for your own mental health. I mean, I get called in after school shootings and stuff like that and work with staff. And it's probably mid-career in some of that stuff. It affected me much more than it does now. Not that I've become callous to it, because I'm not, but I'm just more, I guess, objective coming into it. But so anyway, yes, I found this awesome editor. And this was the catalyst, because I was having a hard time putting all of these pieces together. I had all the pieces, but I couldn't transition them together into this narrative. I mean, who the hell wants to read about safety and stuff like that? It's just not it. I mean, it's like I'll be on shows and people will introduce me and they'll kind of quick do the. And by the way, David's like, he's got some really interesting stories and he's an interesting guy. And just because it's safety, don't tune out. And I knew that I could put together something that would be really edgy and just much more on point than what was out there. And fortunately got this editor that's been completely awesome, super talented. And then 2 weeks the book will be going in, complete it. And I couldn't be more excited about having this book out there, because I think what it's going to do, and just talking about the book a little bit, is what school districts right now do, John, is they'll just throw money out for anything that's fortification. And in Wisconsin, there was, after the Parkland shooting in Florida, it wasn't the Department of Ed, but I don't know. They put $100 million worth of grants out there for schools for fortification. And 94% of the schools, public and private, wrote for these grant applications. They were all funded, and the state still had $35 million left as of like a week ago. So they're putting in bulletproof films on windows and new entrances and these bollards, which they don't work. It's like, you put a couple in front so no one can ram their car through the front doors of the school. And I'm like, well, that's never happened. Like, I studied this stuff, I know this. I've been on public television and stuff. I mean, but what happens, no one looks at the research, threat reporting systems and this youth code of silence and trying to prevent these things. It's all reactive and fortification, what people want to see. So,
isn't it kind of like, sorry to interrupt you, but it's kind of like everybody's fighting the last war. You know what I mean?
Tell me more. Where are you coming with that?
Well, it's like using like World War II, for example. Everybody was, most of the generals had this World War I mindset. Like one of the reasons it was, well, how did France, who was one of the most powerful countries in the world, get overrun in a few weeks? Because they were. I mean, there were stories about how they didn't even weren't able to communicate with their front lines well enough, because they'd hear back, they'd say redeploy your troops to reinforce this embankment. It had already been overrun by the Germans. It was like because they were still thinking the trench warfare of World War I. That's where their their mindsets were. The generals of World War II were the lieutenants of World War I. So that was the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. What people are preparing for is not what the attacks will look like in the future,
right?
At all.
Well, you said like reactive, so you need to be proactive about these things. So how did it start? Like spending millions of dollars putting bulletproof glass. Well, that's not. How is that going to help you with the the kid in the classroom? Or it's anyway. But go ahead.
Yeah. So. So the book focuses on a lot of things like that in fortification, and then also brings up, it's called Lessons of Lower Manhattan, but some of the lessons that we need to learn from Lower Manhattan. One is, like after the Trade Center, the towers collapsed, there wasn't this movement to fortify every high rise in Manhattan and across the country, because you couldn't. Fiscally, and it didn't. And it was 3 times there was, each of the towers was, hit. And then during World War II, during a practice run, military fighter ran into the Empire State Building. So I believe it was three plane hits in 75 years. So that's it. It didn't make sense. And after the 93 bombing, they fortified the basement of the World Trade Center and did all of these things of, checking underneath cars and trucks as they went in and stuff like that, and didn't make a difference. So because when you fortify one target, the terrorist or the school shooter or whatever is just going to figure out what's the way around that. What is a soft target? And I'll work with districts and they'll show things off to me and I'll be like, well, how about at night, like at your football game where you have 2,000 people in the stands and over there's the woods. Like, what do you, we never thought about that. I'm like, well, not to get people freaked out because you can't think of every contingency, but at the same time, just have some common sense in situational awareness and threat detection. But yeah, so it's going to be.
I was thinking about that when you said the forest. I was thinking about the Maginot Line the French built. I said, "Oh no one's ever going to get through this." Well, they were right. So the Germans just went through the forest, right?
It is crazy stuff.
Thank you for tuning in to the Safety Doc Podcast with the nation's leading safety expert, Dr. David Perrodin, author, radio show host, university instructor, researcher, expert witness, and consultant. Powerful testimonials. Dr. Perrodin has a strong reputation as the go-to safety consultant, and he was still able to exceed our expectations. When we went looking for an expert in the field of crisis preparedness and prevention, David was the single person we pursued. Not easy stepping into the touchier subjects of life, but Dr. David pulls it off. Take a listen. Now, back to Dr. David Perrodin and the Safety Doc Podcast.
I'm gonna switch gears a little bit, and you hosted nonfiction authors in a roundtable.
No, fiction authors. It was fiction authors.
Fiction authors, yes.
Well, I mean, they write nonfiction as well, but they were all had been published authors of works of fiction.
And so tell me why. I mean, I thought I listened and I commented. I thought it was fascinating. And what brought you to want to do that?
Well, what's interesting about, we know a lot of people in the same circles is all of these authors I had spoken to, some more than others. So I all knew them personally. And so it was really interesting to me because a lot of times, I don't know if you read a lot of fiction. Some people do, some people don't. But let's say you were a big Stephen King fan. Well, what are the odds you're going to get Stephen King to come sit down and you get to pick his brain? You know what I mean? That's not likely to happen, but I was like, well, here I got, 4 authors all agreed to do this show and I've read all their work and I get to ask them questions. And I've also always been fascinated by authors because, as a reader, I've always had this jealousy of the artistic people. I'm very analytical myself, that's the way my mind works. And, I always, I don't know if you had kids in school that they could freehand draw stuff and I'd always look like, how do you do that? I was like, what the fuck,
Yeah, no. Yeah. My oldest daughter's like that. I mean, she can draw anything, like here.
Yeah. Where'd you get this from?
Not from me.
It must be your mom's gene, but so, it's another thing. So I have a fascination with authors that have this ability, especially prolific authors that can just put pen to paper down and write stuff. And all of those authors had, written, specifically Anne and Andy, those are the 2 I'd known the longest. And they were people who I could ask questions of about their books. And that was fun. And I kind of wanted other people to have access to them. So that was kind of set up in a live stream so I could take questions. And I also would ask people before the show, what kind of questions would you like to ask authors? Yeah. That kind of, and that's kind of what it was. And the way I do my show, a little bit kind of like what you do, kind of keep it pretty organic. You might have a few talking points, but kind of just let it go where it wants to go. So it was really just an experiment,
One of the takeaways when I listened to that and I had a question that you put out for the group and they responded, and it was how much of an outline did they put together before they started their book, or as they were doing their book, were they working off of like detailed outlines of chapters and things? And the consensus was no, not really. That they would put some kind of talk. And for me, I'm like, I am so detailed and outlined that it inhibits the process. And that's again why the editor, I'm working with is someone who's able to counter that side of me that would just bring this to a halt. And I'm great as an expert witness. So when I do like an expert witness, a legal report where I have to like cite things in the Bates, system and stuff like that, I'm right there because like that is just my mind. But when it comes to writing, and so I was pretty surprised by that. I was expecting at least, one person would come out and I think what that helped me do is really back off. And when I finished the book, so the book is really finished right now. It just is having, double check on citations and some of those things. But I stopped doing the outlining. After listening to that roundtable that you hosted, I just was like, no, I'm just going to sit down every day, which was the recommendation of Andy, I believe. He said, sit down every day, whether you want to write or not, and just work at it. And I did that. And it would be 1 hour, might be 3 hours, but I was doing something. And pretty soon, I just got into it, just got the transitions better. I could just read, and I was reading stuff at night that I had written and just becoming more familiar with my work. So it really, and I'm writing nonfiction, but the process helped because in my mind, I'm just thinking, yeah, everybody does these massive outlines and then they work from there. So yeah,
well, no, I think
I
you're
bow
right
to these people too, because I'm like, I'm enamored by what they can do. It's a skill I don't have, but with the assistance of these talented people, it helps me out.
Yeah, well, and then I do believe most people, I think one of the questions I asked, I said, are writers born or are they made? And the consensus of the group was, well, both. It's not purely, I do disagree a little bit, maybe just because I think that they all do have that ability in them, so they don't really, they just kind of take it for granted. I do believe a lot of authors, there is something innate in their abilities to do it. Not everybody can. I guess you could kind of teach everybody to learn how to draw a little bit, but not everybody can be an artist no matter how much they try. You know what I mean?
Right.
If someone is tone deaf, they can't learn to play the violin. It's not going to happen. So, but I do like yourself. So you were able to let go of the analytical side of your mind a little bit and use the creative part, and that's just healthy about life as well. That's one of the reasons I did this, is to try to explore the creative side of me, because I tend to be way more on the analytical side, and to grow as a human, you want to work on the parts of you that are weaker, So
is there a book in your future? Have you tossed some things around? Is that a side of your, I guess as we look at psychological health and balance that you're thinking, yeah, I'd love to write about whatever, this.
Well, I thought about it. I had one person say you're a book looking for an author. We didn't talk about this. I won't get into it on your show, but I worked as a PI for 10 years. So, I have a lot of stories of,
I can imagine, yeah.
Of doing that, but that genre's kind of been done to death. But there are a lot of funny anecdotes and things like that. I could go on about, and especially if I wanted to embellish. But that's not really me. But I think one of the reasons why I didn't ever write anything autobiographical or anything like that is because I remember Anne said something about this. She said that in a lot of ways, all the protagonists in the books of authors, to some degree, are always, a reflection of the author themselves, or an avatar.
Yes.
So I think because I'm a very private person about, things like that, that's one of the reasons why I never really made my writings public. Even the idea I have for a story, even the few chapters I wrote on it, is because I think it's a very personal thing. And I think, authors, in a way, another thing I admire about them is they will put themselves out there. Even when you write nonfiction, you're writing all this stuff and you realize you're going to be judged on, there's this huge judgment about this. Are people going to like it? And it, no matter how thick-skinned you are, because you put your heart and soul and so much time into this, that if it gets, bad review, that's going to hurt.
Yeah. And actually, the book that I have, there's nobody on this side. There is, and people who are kind of in my circle, I and I don't identify people by names in the book, but they've kind of gone where the money has flown. and I'm just not there. And so, yeah, I fully expect that there will be some really harsh ratings of the book. I guess maybe I'm more psychologically prepared for that. And I think expert witness work kind of gets you ready for stuff like that anyway. But this is the side where people are they're making their livelihood of selling all of this crap, which isn't proven at all. And, when I come out and 6 pages in say, really as a parent and on a school board and school district, whatever you are, or your community, your insurance carrier for the district will do all of this for free. Like they'll come in and do the full assessment, through your Arizona emissions insurance. They have their own people. They'll make recommendations, and most of the stuff is going to be super cheap, and they're not going to sell you things that you don't need. Equip every kid with a bulletproof backpack and stuff like this, which happens, and bulletproof whiteboards that you can take off a wall and hide behind. I mean, I've seen it all. And I said, so, just go to these folks and you'll get it. And then they also use what's called, and I talked about this in a PBS special I did after Sandy Hook. And that was intimidating, I'll be honest, because that was a national stage, and it's the only school PBS analytical school safety presentation ever done on PBS. So people can find it. They type in my name, and it took me, after Sandy Hook, I approached PBS and said, I'm doing my PhD in this. I've done safety for a long time, and I believe I can do a empirical presentation, which will be very enlightening to parents, just about school safety. That's not going to have all of the media rhetoric, which was going like, it happened here, it can happen to your kid's school, and all of this stuff. Let me get the numbers. Let me go through all the research. It took me. So we recorded May 22nd, 2013. Sandy Hook happened in December of 2012. So it took me about 4 months to get it research put together. I proposed it then to PBS. They already had me scheduled in time slot. And when you actually come there before a live audience, and you have to stand, and you can't look at your presentation. It's just in front of you on a screen. And then you're getting live prompts too, like from the people up in the booth and stuff like this. And actually it worked out great. I was super cool, during the presentation. I knew everything, but I didn't know at the time that one of the editors or filming, crew or whatever came down, and afterwards I had to stay for 2 hours and answer questions from the audience, and that wasn't recorded. But the National Rifle Association had sent one of their top people to be in the audience in case I would have gone down a second.
Take away everybody's guns, and your kids will be safe.
Which I was, in that there wasn't anything in there, and that's also nothing that I don't believe this is a Second Amendment take away guns resolution to school safety. So, but yeah, this person said, they had a high profile person and ready to to counter some of the things that you were saying, if you would have gone down that road, but that was a huge that was the thing that kind of put me on the map, because then people lawyers saw that because it was on PBS, and people are contacting me all over, in different states and stuff like this, and but lawyers who were representing kids who had been involved in whether it be school shootings or wrongful death, suicide, things like this, because one, they knew I could present, and that I was researched, and then I had credibility, and then that was kind of the springboard into some other things that I had done. And it was interesting with my editor. I said, there's a few things I have in the book that I was privileged to, and again, this as a security standpoint, but because of my clearance, I guess, like you go into meetings where you have to hand over your phone, you have to keep your hands on the desk, with other people, and you get debriefed and you get shown all of the raw things, and you can't talk about it. And then once the case is closed, you can talk, about some things, which I do in the book, nothing in extreme detail. I talk about Virginia Tech, the shooting, and the Sikh temple shooting in Oakland, or not in Oakville, Wisconsin, and some things that happened there that never hit the media. But you have to cite that in a specific way. And that was one thing. There was a book came out by Dave Cullen, who was a reporter was reporting on Columbine, and once Columbine broke, like he was reporting, and then like for 10 years he just studied, everything about Klebold and Harris and about the school and dynamics, and then he wrote this book Columbine, which was a big success. And I read it, and one of my critiques though of the book was he did a lot of things where he would say, I talked to somebody like, in the know, and this is what they said, but he said, I can't cite them. And I'm like, that's okay if you do that a couple times in a book. But I mean, once you like, once the big chunks of the book are based upon, these people that you've talked to, which you can't reference and things like that.
Yeah. If they're supporting their thesis based on all this non-cited sources, then it's like, well, how do we know you're just not?
I know. And I totally, I believe him, but it was really hard for me to I'm like, after you've been this close to it, Dave, for your 10 years doing this, positionality and how much of this has influenced, how you're writing this. So yeah, with my editor, I said, I've got two examples and I need to cite them in this way, which they actually tell you, how you can cite these things. But I said, I have to make sure that I don't come off as being, too much of this. As you said, your credibility can erode quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, The Private Detective, I think living in New York, living in, your early years in New York and in Seattle, I think a lot of things from that would make a great story. Do you have any idea though for like or not nonfiction, but for fiction? Like, are you, like in a galaxy far away or something like this, or something?
No, I tend, well, because I do read a lot, and I will admit that a lot of the fiction that I read, especially in my 20s, I loved Robert Ludlum. I don't know if you ever read any of his stuff. He wrote The Bourne Identity.
Yeah, okay.
That was written by Robert Ludlum in like 1980 or something like that, and or maybe not quite that old, but close. And so that is the kind of genre that if I was to write, I would go for and write something like that. I think if I was to do fiction, I would, which is probably what I would do. I mean, of course, it would be different than that, but I do like the idea of the lone wolf against the world, or some sort of, or even an average man put in an extraordinary circumstances, and then all of a sudden his abilities come out, that kind of thing.
Oh, that's amazing. And yeah, one of the great things of being a fiction writer is you don't get tied down to all of the citations and stuff like that, because people that I've interviewed for my book, substantial portions, I need to get permission from them and submit that to the publisher of saying that they're okay that they've been quoted in this section. Because yeah, literally, I mean, you could ruin their career if you're printing something that they said that goes counterculture in their industry too. So I have some of that I've had to deal with. And one is a friend of mine, Dr. Sean Dickers, critiqued the Army came out with an active shooter game last year and started to make it available to schools. So a teacher could play the part of the shooter, a teacher or a student, and then you could pick large school or small school and go through this video game. And he was checking it out, and I said, obviously, to me, I think it's a pretty ridiculous idea, because it's not like after 9/11 there was a video game for skyscraper managers of plane flying into skyscraper or something like that as a way to be trained. I mean, it's just kind of ridiculous. But
right.
So he was saying, yeah, he picked out a lot of things I wouldn't have known, because he designs games and he teaches people how to do these things at a PhD level, and he's worked on some very significant games that are out there. And he said structurally there are these flaws in that, but it's one of those things too where I'm like, I got to be really, really careful and make sure he's comfortable with what is being published, because it can come against him and his career. And so as we kind of, this has been absolutely fascinating for me. We talked about, again, the kind of the changes in the city, and as you were talking about the homeless population, and has the city done anything? Is there any initiative, anything out there to stabilize? And I guess, how is this hitting you as far as even like taxes and surcharges and things like that to so either remedy this or whatever? Because yeah, but what's
well,
happening?
Seattle, I don't think they, actually they did say no to one tax. There was actually it was called the head tax, where they were going to charge it basically they nicknamed it the Amazon tax. Those who are listening, you can Google it. Okay. And it was the city council passed it, and then I think the mayor because people got nervous that Amazon because this was who it was aimed at, was Amazon, because they probably are the largest employer, if not directly employer. There's all these ancillary companies that pop up around a large company.
Yes.
It's kind of like, well, if you have a car plant here, well, then you have all the other things that, the restaurants that feed the car, So the area that I live in, that's why it's so trendy now, is kind of like it's the Amazon area, where everybody that's been buying up property in my building and the buildings around here, they all work at Amazon because they want to live close to work. And there's all these, there's one area called South Lake Union used to be like warehouses and just empty space, and now it's gotten totally gentrified, there's all these little boutiques and gourmet chocolate shops and trendy bars, and you know what I mean? Like it kind of reminds me of what happened in New York in the late 90s, when everything, I remember when I go back to New York and visit it, after it had been cleaned up, I was like, oh shit, I moved. A funny joke, when I moved out of New York, so I don't know if I want to use bad language, but when I moved away from New York, that year after me being gone, the New York Rangers won the Stanley Cup for the first time since 1948.
Yeah.
The Knicks made it they didn't win, but they actually made it to the NBA Finals. The Yankees won the World Series, and everybody was like, John, I don't know what you did, but don't come back. That was like all my friends. So that was interesting. But oh God, I forget where I was going with that. I got lost when I was thinking about the Rangers winning. I missed that. That's one of the things I do miss about New York. There's no professional hockey team in Seattle.
Oh, yeah.
And we don't even have a professional basketball team anymore in Seattle. I don't mind that. I was never huge. Well, I mean, I did like basketball when I was high school, college.
The Supersonics. Yeah, I remember the Seattle Supersonics. Where did they go? Yeah.
Oh, I forget where they ended up. Was it like Oklahoma? Something funny.
Yes.
It was like someplace like basketball.
Yeah, the Nashville Snakes or whatever. Yeah, they. Yes.
It didn't. They weren't supported here. I mean, they played really well one year. Do you remember that? And they they lost.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
Way back when in the 90s, they were kicking it, and they actually did win, I believe, years before. When I was a little kid, I think they won in '79. They won the NBA championship in 1979, I think. I could be wrong on that, but that was before my time. But so they, that's. I think they want to have more sports teams here now. That's you were asking about the taxes in Seattle.
Yeah.
I think our sales tax in Seattle is over 10%.
Oh wow.
So yeah, can you imagine? That's like Canada tax. So there's all these taxes on your gas and everything like that. It's much more expensive here than it is even in places like New York, where you think everything's more expensive in New York. Well, believe it or not, it's not. And gas is something that really affects the average person here, because a lot of people are forced to drive here, where in New York you got such a good public transit system that you don't. Having a car is
I never thought of that.
Yeah, is a luxury item. So and the thing about sales tax too, it's a regressive tax, because it hurts the working man more than it does the rich people, because it's a bigger chunk of their income. So yeah, Seattle is fortunately property taxes are relatively low, but they're obviously they're going up because property values is going up. So and then they kill us on because I was on the well, now I'm have to go back again. I'm on the board of the homeowners association here, and they kill us like we pay more for water and sewer, our building does, than the homeowner association, we have to pay for water and sewer. It's covered in the homeowners dues, but we have to adjust for it. Seattle charges more money for water than any other municipality in the country.
Okay.
And no, it's just a huge expense because
Yeah.
people don't realize how much, I mean, it comes to like just a building where we only have like 58 units here. And God, I think it's like it's like 35,000 a year.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's a lot of money. So, things like that Seattle is always nickeling and diming you on. And, even the roads now, there's tolls everywhere, to go across anywhere. And because there's a lot of waterways here, that you have to drive all these ways unless you're going to go the long way around where it takes 3 hours. They really get you everywhere. Parking, you got to pay for parking everywhere. I mean, that's another big thing. Used to be when I moved here, you could park your car, anywhere. Now you're paying through the nose. Things like that, you get nickeled and dimed, it's not nickeled and dimed anymore. Now it's more like a nickel. By nickel, I mean a $5, and dime, I mean a $10, So everything is expensive here. It's really out of control.
So I imagine, people with families, unless, you have a lot of income, you're not moving there. So is it mostly your perception of single people, or is the population becoming older, retirees, or what's happening?
Oh, it's basically all H1B visa type people. That's basically, there's a huge population of, Indians and Asians that come over because there's a lot of tech jobs here, and not just tech jobs. I think that lots of jobs here, and so there's a huge immigrant community here. So that's another thing about Seattle. It doesn't, because it's experienced so much growth from so many different people coming from so many different places, it doesn't have a strong sense of self. You know what I mean? There's nothing cohesive about it. Like,
sure,
there's not. Everybody here is from somewhere else, and by somewhere else, it's not necessarily another city in America. So many times it's another country. So it's not really a strong feeling of community. I mean, I do miss that from New York, because even like being from the neighborhood, being someone from the old neighborhood, like there was a bond you just kind of had with that, and or even like on the East Coast, this was true. I lived in Boston for a year too, like, or just being either Irish or Italian. Like if you were Irish, I'm Irish, and like it was very common for people to be like, say, first generation Irish or first generation Italian back in the East Coast. And, out here, even if you're, European descent, they're all mixed together, and they got, they're a quarter Swedish and an eighth Italian and 1/16 Cherokee or something.
Yeah.
So they don't even have that kind of identity going on. Everybody's mudded up, and so it's different, and I think, to be honest, I think it's kind of a negative thing though, because there isn't anything to get to coalesce people. You know what I mean?
I agree, and I've spoken with family members about this, and I refer to it as vesting. Like when the town I grew up in, my grandfather and his cohorts and things like that, developed a lot of the town. Built a lot of the roads and things like that, and served on different boards and things like that, and you had that sense of familiarness and having putting some sweat equity into creating, and I think just as a society, right, with people moving in and out of places and things already kind of being discovered or created, I don't know if there's this vesting, and that's. I was watching a couple documentaries on the CCC camps, back in the 30s and early 40s, and just that you can still see, some of these structures in national parks and things like that. And we were out in South Dakota, Rapid City, and a number of CCC projects out there, especially Custer Park and things like that. And yeah, just as this investment from people into making the community better and creating something, I just don't think it's there. And again, this isn't to undercut people. It's just I think these things have already developed, and they're people are just using what's existing, and maybe technology has replaced a lot of these things. It's like, I remember my kids and I, and wife, we went up to a city not too far from us that we like to go to. It's a college town. And I was pointing out, we were walking along the river, and they replaced this one bridge. And I said, I remember like when they replaced the bridge, I was going to college here, and they literally, it was all precast, so they just brought in trucks and like the people of the community, the older
Legos,
guys,
Legos.
yeah. It wasn't like the bridge that originally was there, which was probably built stone by stone with someone scraping everything off, and 100 years ago. This thing was put up like in 2 weeks, and it was just kind of laid into place. And I just remember watching this, and I was just like, something really impersonal and stale about this. And two, you look at it today, and yeah, it doesn't have the character also of the bridge that it replaced. So it has the utility, but again, no one's going to bring their kids there in 100 years and say, hey, my grandfather worked for this on 2 weeks, and then he went and did the road down there and put blacktop on it. But so
there's no aesthetic to it. It's all just utilitarian. Yeah. Yeah.
They replaced a bridge in my town where I live here, and they put this really nice stone facade on the outside of it, facing the river, which nobody can see because no one's down on the river. And instead of putting it on the inside, so when you drive by, and when it was done, somebody wrote this letter to the editor saying, what a stupid thing to do. And I'm like, yeah. And it was one of these things too. I mean, it was this project that should have been on Engineering Marvels, like probably an 88-foot bridge that took like 9 years to build and things like that. I mean, it was just, and it shouldn't have. I was like, what the hell is going on over here? I mean, what is this being built on some type of soil that they've never encountered before? And what is taking so damn long on this thing? I mean, that's I want to know, because something, I mean, this face logic when Empire State Building was built in less than 2 years and something like that. And I don't know, and they had to reroute a river that was underneath it and things like that. But,
yeah, it's amazing. That was nearly 100 years ago that they built that. Isn't that fascinating that they did that back in the 1930 or whatever it was?
Yeah. In the pace that they would move on that, and yeah, literally, I think if you go down so many floors, there is still a small stream that goes through the basement of this, and this. It's fascinating too. I was talking. I wrote in the book about how nothing is exact. Like in all engineering, there's tolerances. Mm-hmm. And how, when Hoover Dam was built, I remember doing the Hoover Dam tour before 9/11, when basically you had one tour guide and they let you do whatever the hell you wanted. Like, I remember walking past levers I could have just switched. I mean, there was it was so trusting and so open, and they took you deep inside, and I remember the guides taking the flashlight, and he's like, yeah, this is all the water that is kind of like leaking through the dam, and then we have these gutters and stuff. Like, water, what the hell are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, the dam has always leaked because the walls leak and it leaks underneath, and there's this grout curtain, but you can only get so much. But they have that calculated in, and it is a large amount, like like a swimming pool every minute or something. But relatively speaking,
they pump it out, and
it's. But I'm thinking, they're like, holy smokes! Like, I thought this thing was like boom, like nothing coming through like this was. And they're like, no, that's. But that was something too, like I wrote about that, and then also just wrote about that from a contemporary safety perspective of, whatever you create, and we know this through history, there's always going to be some weakness or some new technological advancement which will exploit something, like the battleships becoming, and even the aircraft carriers today, of the question of how long is it before an aircraft carrier is going to be a liability.
There was actually an article I was reading about that several months back, how they showed that the new weapon system employed by the Chinese are developing is going to make the aircraft, because it's such a huge investment in money,
right,
for an aircraft carrier. And basically now that they can pretty much, the theory behind the carrier groups is they would form this net around them.
Yeah.
But now the technology now is like, no, that wouldn't really work. They can. They'll soon be able to take them out. So you could lose an aircraft carrier, which is, I don't know how many hundreds of billions of dollars,
yes,
with a single fancy bullet, is where it's getting. But when you were talking about 9/11, I was I had a memory. In the 90s, I was training for my pilot's license before 9/11, and I remember I went up with my flight instructor once, and where we fly out of, the Boeing field is where the flight schools are and stuff like that. And this is very busy air traffic area here. There's lots of because of Boeing,
Yes.
there's lots of and there's lots of private pilots here as well. But one of the things that they used to let you do if you flew, like, because there's almost no planes that land, let's say, from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. At the at the big airports, because people just don't like to fly during that. And one of the things they used to let you do is you couldn't land at SeaTac because there's like a fee to land at these Class B airports, but you could drive down the runway like that. You could call the tower. And you could say, turn the lights up to full, and they'd be bored out of their mind. The air traffic controllers, like, the guys that are working at 3 a.m. because there's nothing to do, and you have to ask permission to get into Class B airspace, and then they would grant it to you because they got nothing to do, and they would make you, squawk a certain thing and ident, and they'd say, okay, and you say, could you turn the light? They sometimes they would, and you could just drive. You couldn't touch your wheels, but you could go like just a few feet off the ground and go woo. And I remember doing it with my flight instructor. It was a blast. Stuff like that after 9/11. Nope, nothing. I mean, now they my God, they'd probably be arrested in git mode for doing that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So 9/11. You lived in New York, but then you were in Seattle at the time of 9/11. What was your feeling of that? I mean, because you knew people in New York, you knew New York. Of course, we have.
I knew people who died.
Okay. So with the anniversary of 9/11 coming up, if you wouldn't mind, as we close out here, sharing anything about that.
Well, 9/11 is interesting because it's changed our lives in so many ways. I mean, ways that you, of course, are aware of because it's what you do for a living. But so many people who are, because it's happened. It's been 17 years now. Yeah. A lot of people don't realize, it's people like, we're older, right? We don't like to think about it. But so many people were too young to remember 9/11 or too young to remember what life was like before 9/11. So it's kind of like there was it kind of was our generation's Pearl Harbor.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
There was a time before that and a time after that. And, so much has changed now where, 9/11, there was, for briefly a period of time after it, I mean, it was so tragic. I mean, I personally knew 5 people that I grew up with that died on that day.
That's
one was a fireman. One was a fireman. The other 4 just worked in the towers, in the financial sector. And they, so, and some of it was really tragic. I mean, one of the kids, Damien, his wife was 6 months pregnant when he died. It was just really horrific stuff like that. But at the same time, there was this huge coming together in New York. There was really pride of being a New Yorker, about that. And right. People really did come together, and you've seen all this in the documentaries and stuff. And there really was this sense that, no one's going, and that was, just not to get political because we are closing it out, but I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that George W. Bush ever made was, basically, he could have done anything. The country was so united at that point.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like nothing since literally Pearl Harbor had the country been that united, and he blew it. I mean, we could have accomplished anything if he gave us a noble goal to strive for. But he blew it on a ridiculous, Iraq war that put our country $3 trillion in debt. So anyway, that's my soapbox, but only because I do feel like because I knew people who died that day, and even just being from New York, I mean, just you feel like, well, this is an attack on my home, and so I always think that was the biggest blown opportunity that has had, in my lifetime I can think of, where a country had, we had so many people, a country like the United States, where they have so many resources, both intellectually and just, we have everything here where we could have done anything, and we did nothing.
So
nothing.
So give me something that would have been in that anything. What like a massive overhauling of our infrastructure, project?
It could have been something like that, or it's really hard to say now, because I had thoughts about this at the time. Now I don't know, because it seems like we're in a different world now, so it's hard to even really to go back into my mindset then. But it really could have been, we could have done anything. Could you imagine, think about, like, in 1969 we were able to put a man on the moon. What would we have done in 2001 with that, if we had invested all the energy and manpower and brain power and capital into something, but we blew it, and and the sad thing is I don't think there's going to be anything, because you look at the country now, and I'm not going to get into the politics, left versus right. I'm sure your audience, they fall all over the spectrum on this. But the sad thing is that people are so polarized now politically, where you can't even really have civil conversations with people anymore if you don't align with them on where they stand on the political spectrum, on both sides. It's
no, you're right, and I'm going to be on a show hosted by Trip Elix, who is a security expert, and the topic is going to be something that I talked about actually with Ann when Ann was on my show, but talking politically, just in the last 6 months, and not before this, just in the last 6 months, the expert witness requests have changed from what would have been youth suicide by bullying, or by some type of claim of neglect on the part of school or county services or something like that. And now it's these claims of school administrators who have lost their jobs because they have been accused of contributing to a hostile work environment. And so this caught me off. I had a couple of these come across. I was contacted, and I said, and so they send you, if you're interested, the lawyer kind of sends you a maybe 5-6 page briefing, and here's kind of what the case is, and what would happen is people could be accused of contributing, again, to this hostile work environment, which wouldn't be specifically defined. Like, what did you do to create a hostile work environment? It could be something where, you're not going along with office politics, or some movement that's going on that probably is going to be politically aligned, or with a...
Well, is this like misgendering, some like wrong pronoun usage, or wearing a MAGA hat, or, it could be any of those things, yeah.
Or frankly, not approving paying for, maybe one of them, honestly, and some of these, like, the other part is HR doesn't tell. So these people all of a sudden, they come into work and they're ushered into a room, and HR says, you are on paid or unpaid leave, and we are conducting an investigation. There have been allegations that you've contributed to a hostile work environment, and then that person's email is shut down, and everything they can use to defend themselves. So all of their records, meeting notes, whatever, all gone, and they're out of the building, and they're like, what did I do? Like, what can you tell me specifically? And they don't tell them. And so then the lawyers then, contact, and they said, what do you think? And I said, I don't know. I've never had this happen before, where, you don't have, these people are frozen out, and then what happens is HR comes and says, well, here's the deal. We can make it, we can go through this process, or you can just resign. And if we go through the process and you try to get another job, of course, this could be made public, and, that you were accused of contributing to a hostile work environment, or, or if we, end up in terminating you, then you're not eligible for work, unemployment benefits and things. So people just leave. And I'm seeing a number of good people, I mean, great people who have no idea what happened. And in one case, though, in talking with the attorney, it was that all of the meetings for this one company or had so many hours of community service that their employees would do, and then they would have it approved, through the company, and if he did 20 hours a year or whatever. But they were having some meeting, and they were not given an account for a supper and refreshments and things like that for this meeting, which was more about culture and diversity of the and that was what happened. Is this manager then was accused of a hostile work environment, and the manager countered of saying, I thought the meeting was like an hour-long meeting. Like, I didn't think we were having a whole night meeting and all of this other stuff. I wasn't. And it was like, no, that was the deal. And I talked to my dad about this. He was a school principal for 30 years or I think 35 years and retired out. And he's been retired for over 10 years. But he said, yeah, just everything has changed. He goes to these retired administrator meetings. I actually teach school law to superintendents. And I'm just having to say, you have to be so hyper aware, but at the same time, you can't make, a backup copy of an email memo you sent out to everybody in case someone claims that it is a microaggression toward them, even if it's, that they're hinting that they're supposed to check their email from home. I mean, things, John, you and I think would be something you'd sit down and talk about. I mean, if it's like, yeah, let's work through this, or there's something in here I need clarification on, help me understand this. But people go right toward no, I'm filing this, and that's a knockout punch, and it's a career ender, and it's really terrifying because that's one of the things of writing the book right now for me is I really can't be severely damaged because I could retire now if I wanted. So it's not like I'm tied to, tethered, certainly they're could, and I'm sure that there are school districts that obviously, in the country don't work with me because I don't support some of these other philosophies of these high drama drills and stuff like that. But if you're not in kind of those positions or a minimalist and other things, and like you said, keeping a low profile, if you put yourself out there a little bit, even if you're a go-getter, it can come back where, boom, you can be out of the game. And I don't even know if it's easy to get back in the game because some of these people, they're done. They leave the profession then because they've either been blacklisted or it's like I'm not going through that again. And it's not just schools, but that has happened so much in expert witness work. And so I'm talking about it really with Tripp. And I approached him initially, and then he had me go to different lawyers that he knew, and I was just trying to get someone to help me understand what might be going on. Was there some change in the law or something that I'm totally missing? And they're like, no, this is just a tactic that's used right now. It's used very effectively. So what Tripp and I are going to try to parse out is how you can have some defense to that. Are there some documents? Is it worth it, for example, to copy your memos on a thumb drive and keep them with you, although that goes against the Non-Disclosure Act that any employer would have, that you can't take property with you? But is that your defense then in case you get some allegation against? I don't know. So, I mean, I'm telling you this. It freaks me out because I'm sitting there and I'm like, I have no answer. And I'm
that's a helpless feeling you have. I mean, here you are, an expert in this field, and like you said this was just 6 months at least that you've been aware of it, where all of a sudden that this has changed. This has become this new trend. I mean, I personally think, I'm not no lawyer here, so I'm not giving legal advice, but if it was me, I would make the thumb drive copy of everything, just the CYA. I mean. You'd have to do a cost benefit analysis on this. What's the risk? What's the upside and the downside of risking that. That's how you have to look at these things. But you and I are kind of insulated by these things. I mean, I kind of keep a low profile. I use a pseudonym, but I'm not really out there anyway. And I'm for the most part self-employed, but no one is really self-employed because unless you're paying yourself, you're really always working for somebody else. So I always thought that was kind of funny. It's a misnomer, really. Self-employed, really? You mean you pay yourself? Well, no. So it's a joke. Self-employed. You're someone else is paying you. But so there is that danger now that we live in this toxic environment where everybody is kind of looking to it's like they're searching for things to be upset about, or these things have legal and financial and sometimes career-ending consequences, which is really heartbreaking. I mean, some of these people have families to support, and then they're could totally get destroyed. I mean, my personal theory on that is that you can never back down on these people because they'll never be happy. So unless they're making it, unless they're looking at you like, well, we're going to pay you this money to go away because we don't want to deal with the other person making the allegation. I'm going to say, well, you're going to really have to make it worth my while. Yeah. Otherwise, I'm going to fight it, and I'm going to be your worst nightmare, and that's also that's a little bit of my, and I understand not everybody has the same personality type I do, so that might not be practical for everybody, but I think that once you apologize once, it's like, well, it's kind of like then you admitted guilt, and then they'll never be happy with just apology. It's like they're going to want more blood,
I'm with you, and actually, I mean, and it's one of these things too. I mean, the money that they will pay you if you have an answer for this is unbelievable. And I'm like, you could bring a truck of money and dump it, in my driveway, and I wouldn't be able to help you. I mean, it's not a money thing here. It's not like you can pay me triple my rate and I'm going to come up with some solution. But I believe you are on to the course of action, and that's where I'm going to go. A trip is saying, okay, like, if you were to come in and I had, Charles Mack on, who's in IT, and kind of gave the side of the Non-Disclosure Act and how those are used to be leverage when HR says, well, we have the Non-Disclosure Act, so we can just terminate you for violating that. If you have any record that you once sent to like your home email, even though like we expected you to do this report from home, stuff like that, but that's where they'll get you.
Well, but then you can come at them back with like selective enforcement of a rule.
Yeah.
So if they're not enforcing it equally, then you can claim it's discriminatory. So they can get them for that. So
absolutely. So I'm with you. So I've kind of been working behind the scenes and getting ready for this show, and we're going to kind of go with the counter position of here's how to do it from a technology standpoint, which Tripp totally has down. Like here's how to have all of that documentation, and then I'm going to pair that with, and here's exactly the strategy I would recommend after thinking about this and that you approach with legal counsel. And you have to have legal counsel who's willing to take this on too. And a lot of lawyers, I think, are kind of not sure, they don't seem very excited.
They're skittish.
Yeah, on stuff like this. But I think it's the same thing. You come in there and it's like absolutely not. Like I did my job, and it's the thing too is like you have to meet the standard of what a reasonable person would have done given your job description, and it's one of those things of coming full guns, with your documentation, with your performance evals and things like this, and then pressing their hand on open records request. And that's another thing I've seen sneaky and knowing. I mean, this happens like records. All of a sudden they'll say, well, we don't have the records or whatever. I've dealt with school districts like that in court cases where they'll be like, we don't have a handbook for the middle school from 2 years ago. Like, well, you know what? I bet if we put an ad in the paper and we paid $25 for a handbook from 2014 to 15, someone's going to bring one up. And that's a true story, by the way. And suddenly they cough this up, and I'm like, no. I was talking to the attorney. I'm like, here's the deal. Put it out there anyway, because maybe there's different versions of it. I'm like, we want every single version there was ever of this. And these swarm techniques too, of where they say like a policy, like we post in every building, like our, harassment policy and stuff like that. And I'm like, here's the deal. Get 10 people, and you have access through disclosure and getting records, and go to like their 10 buildings all within 10 minutes, like everyone's in the parking lot and then you just go in because you have the right to go in. So it's not like they can call over and say, oh my goodness, like they were just here and here. So we're, here, just open your email and print this and put it up on the wall. And I'm like, if they're going to use these tactics against, again, what I believe are people who are very dedicated in all of this, but are running counter to some of these political movements, I want people to be protected. And I'm fighting, a lot of times in those cases, for people, I think, who have done a very good job and just get caught up in this and blindsided it, and then, helping them out. But, oh my God. And we did take a turn there, but it's, it is, it's frightening territory. I think if I was younger, I remember a principal, early in my career, and the guy it was his retirement year. And I sat down with him and he was kind of like bestowing his advice to me. He was a pretty cool guy. And he just said, you know what, like this year I can do anything. I can do all of the stuff I wanted to do as a principal in the school, like all of these initiatives and all of these things, because he said, if I would have done this early in my career, I would have got run out because of the teachers union not wanting to do it, or, just too many feathers would have been ruffled. But now I can finally be free to like do the job the way it should be done. And then, in 9 months, I'm out of here and then somebody else is in. So it was like, he finally had this and they can't take my state retirement away. And, it's not like he was doing anything that was wrong, but he was finally doing all of these initiatives that he just held back on because and this was back when it was kind of safe yet, like he probably just would have got, his ears pinned back a little bit by the board saying, hey, teachers are coming in and stuff like that, tone this down. Like we don't want to, but yeah, it's a strange society. And with these movements, and you probably saw Stefan Molyneux had 2 strikes against his YouTube channel last week. And then he immediately made a plea, to his viewers to contact YouTube and get these strikes removed. But he was pretty panicked. I watched that video. He's like, if he gets 3 strikes, he has like 800,000 subscribers and the biggest philosophy show in the world and stuff like that. But, we saw, this deplatforming taking place. I don't think anyone's...
Well, if they would, as big as Stefan Molyneux, Alex Jones is bigger than he was. And they took, and that was a coordinated thing too. The Alex Jones wasn't just who was it? Twitter, YouTube, who else did they, it was all like in the same day, like within a 24-hour period, they all, so it wasn't like an algorithm. It was like people actually had to get together and plan this out. So, that is spooky that we live in this world. But, I kind of, I don't want to say I'm optimistic, but I think that there might be some good come of this because these people are ultimately overplaying their hand. And I believe that, eventually the, pendulum swings both ways.
Yes.
It goes up and then it comes back. So I do believe there's going to be a lot of pushback. And, I was just talking to someone earlier in another, in a live stream earlier today, where we were talking about basically what I was saying was there's no one who can be in the middle anymore as far as your political ideology. Because you were talking about like even in your work environment now, you have to, if you're in a leftist work environment, which is usually the case, especially if it's in education or something like that, it's going to be probably pretty hardcore leftist. So if you're at all right wing, you can't let that be known because they'd be looking for something. So you'd have to just pretend to play this role. So because there's no way there's no room in the middle anymore. It's like that old joke. There's nothing in the middle of the road except yellow lines and roadkill. Yeah. And that's basically what's happened right now. So you have 2 sides, and Jordan Peterson talked about this. He says, once we've gotten to the point where people no longer can talk to each other, what's next? War. Yeah. You get large groups who refuse to communicate, or have any sort of real, sincere intellectual discourse. Well, once that's extreme polarization happens, well, the next step is violence. That's, so we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, for example, in schools, I'm teaching the superintendent law class and stuff, but people are not taking these administrative positions. There's like, 54% open in Wisconsin, whether you take, principals, directors of special ed, just record numbers. And these are well compensated positions. I mean, you can walk into some of these positions, 140, 170,000 plus benefits, and people are like, I'm not touching it because, the turnover, it's 2 years, is the average tenure for a superintendent in the United States is 2 years. It's about 2.3 for a principal, and that's average.
Wow.
So it's all of this institutional knowledge, but I mean, is out the window, and this legacy knowledge of, someone who was a principal because their dad was a principal and educated, they're not. And that's all gone. Which is a big safety risk in of itself, because no one kind of knows what all the keys do for the building is kind of an analogy.
There's no continuity.
You get handed this key ring, and it's like, if you're there for 20 years, you got time to figure out what all the keys are. But if you're there for 2 months, and no one, again, we talked about this earlier, but the vesting, no one's going to really put their heart and soul into it when they fully probably expect that they're only going to be there 2 years before they have some type of claim put against them, or a parent is suing them because of claiming discrimination with their child of not making a cut score for a choir or for a basketball team. I mean, I've seen that end careers, and it just gets so toxic. And school boards are elected, so these are people who are coming in and turning over too. So it's you can have a school board quickly turn on an administrator if a school board is getting heat and people are coming to that school board member's, home and picketing and stuff like that. They're like, we'll just buy out your contract and goodbye. So it is as you said, it's war. And I also think it is causing attrition and just people reluctant to take these leadership roles, because you're just going to get hit with so many arrows, just nonstop. People are going to be coming at you, from all these different agendas, and it's like, no, I'm not, absolutely not going to do it. I have friends who have just recently left. I had one friend this year who didn't hit retirement age, kind of hit his threshold and said, I just can't do this anymore. I can't be brought into these lawsuits where we're really trying to serve the child per the letter of the law, but then the parent is saying, there were too many suspensions of my child, and there should have been, other behavior plans put in place. And, my friend's like, well, we've done all of these things and we continue to do these things, but your child presents with very intense, severe needs. And if your child is hitting somebody else, we have to take your child away from that other student. I mean, but no, that becomes then a seclusion and a restraint report. And one thing too is like the state, like the Department of Public Instructions, they'll always back off. Yeah, they'll leave like the district to figure it out in their lawyer, and then when it's kind of close to settlement, they'll come in at the very end. I mean, they're not going to give you any guidance. That's one thing with lawyers, In teaching a law class, I said, lawyers will always give you like options, but they'll never kind of like say what's the best option. So.
Oh yeah, it's impossible to get a straight answer sometimes. It's funny. Many of my back, years ago when I was worked as PI, most of my clients were actually attorneys. Okay. I did mostly lawsuit feasibility investigations. So, basically is someone or something worth suing,
I get asked that question, too. So people, the lawyers will contact me and say, what is really, based upon your interpretation of the Elementary Secondary Education Act and IDEA and stuff like this, what's the feasibility? How long would this take? And I'll be like, yeah, it's not worth it. Or yeah, you've got something. But that's really fascinating. So it sounds like you could go right back into that because
I can't
is out there.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons I got out of it was some of the things that I did. Well, I guess the statute of limitations is up, but the ways I used to, well, I don't mean anything violent, but I mean the tactics I used to find information out were, at least nowadays, would certainly be illegal. Then there was some gray area. Okay. So it was, but I mean, yeah. So that was one of the reasons why I had to get out of it, because what I was doing was It was pretty funny. But I mean, I'll tell you one technique that I did use, which was pretty funny, was one of the ways you'd find people sometimes is you'd find someone that you know that they're in contact with, and you'd get their toll records, their phone calls, right? So you'd get, so the way to get, but it's basically a lot of times, you can't just call up the phone company and say, give me someone's phone records. They're not going to do it, right? So one of the things that I used to do was this is back in the 90s, I had a modem, like a TTY modem,
I do.
So I used to call up the tech people pretending to be deaf or, disabled, whatever, and say, could you please help me? This guy, I'd have different little social engineering scripts I'd use and saying, we need to know all the calls he's made because he used to work for us. That was one scam I used to do, or, different ones. And because the computer program I had, they would literally type out all the calls and the durations of everything right on my screen. And I used to just save it to a text file, and I remember giving it to my clients and they'd be like, how the fuck did you get
Right.
So, stuff like that. And, that was, so, I mean, there was millions of things you could do, but God, if I did that today, I think I could get in some really serious trouble. But, it was, and I had a reputation. People said, oh, just call this guy. He can get you anything, and I kind of could, I mean, it was just.
Oh my goodness. That is hilarious.
Yeah.
That is, oh my, yeah. This, I mean,
and if they gave you any guff, you could always bring up the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. Are you discriminating against me? And then they would, oh no, and they.
Oh my goodness.
And especially dealing like with the county clerk, sometimes they give you the runaround about records and stuff like that. But you call on the TTY line, like, well, no, they got to help you, because they're. So if you wanted. You wanted the records that they had to give it to you, So I was like, hey, so. But anyway, that's an aside. Not, I'm not saying I ever really did that. I'm just, anyway.
Yeah. No, that's an amazing story. It comes to mind real quick. A couple of weeks ago, there was a guy. Pittsburgh Steelers had training camp, and the fans, show up for training camp, and this guy shows up wearing a Troy Polamalu jersey. The safety that they had, who was an all-star, retired a couple of years ago. Anyway, this guy shows up, and he's fit, and he looks kind of like Troy, and he's wearing the same attire that the practice team has. And he merges in, this is like 2 weeks ago, and there's a story about it. He merges in as the team is coming out and goes on the practice field and starts practicing with them. And finally, someone's like, the thing that gave it away is he wore this guy's name. The jersey. If he just would have not worn the jersey, he could have probably been out there longer because, you never know who you're trying out for.
Right. Yeah.
Or someone's playing a Canadian league, or this guy's from, Venezuela or whatever. So there's pictures of him out there, and finally security, says, dude, what the hell are you doing out here? And he didn't fight him. I mean, he just walked off with security and stuff. But
you remind me of that movie Major League where Wesley Snipes just showed up at training camp.
Yeah,
he wasn't invited. Do you remember that?
He wakes up that one morning and his bed is outside.
Yeah. No, that's what this guy did. Yeah.
Say hey, Willie Mays Hayes here. Play like Mays, and I run like Hayes.
Willie Mays Hayes. Hey, nice catch.
Yeah.
Hey, there's a hot shot toward the hole. I think we got hosed on that one. Yeah, the fact that was filmed at County Stadium. And since we're talking personal safety, I went with my best friend to like one of the last games at County Stadium before they opened Miller Park, so like 1991. And Miller Park got delayed a year because the Big Blue crane collapsed onto the structure and did massive damage. So they didn't do any upkeep on Miller Park, like the last 2-3 years. Literally what the upkeep was, as many drywall screws as you could get and a couple of power drills and duct tape.
Duct tape and Band-Aids, yeah.
And I remember we had pretty decent seats. Again, this was, a stadium built in the 50s. So even like decent seats there's just bad, but they were, maybe 6 rows up on behind the home team dugout. And I remember trying to stand up. I'm like, what the hell am I? And like my pants were snagged in like almost fish hooks from all of these like screws where the tops were kind of sheared off because of course maintenance doesn't care. They're just trying to get the boards back together.
Right.
and I literally, like, my clothes were ruined. Like, my shirt was ruined because the back was, and everything was snagged. It was just like,
You needed a tetanus shot
I
probably
know,
from
it's
the.
like, and the scoreboard, like half of it wouldn't light up, and so you'd have to, and it was a monochrome scoreboard, and so I mean, it was the fact that it was so, they nothing. If a light bulb burned out, I mean, the thing was like nothing was replaced. So it there was just the comedy in that of when they shut down these places that and the fact that they had this delayed 1 year, so they were, they had to make it last one more year. But I remember, and it was a good pair of pants because, it's going to a Brewers game, and so it was a nicer pair of pants, and I think it had like a Brewers, shirt, and and got home, and both of it like just had to go in the trash. And my friend Glenn, I think the same thing happened to him. I was like, what? I think I cut my hand too, like at one point. I'm like, Jesus, should I just stand here? Like, what do you want me to do? Like,
nowadays that would be a lawsuit. Yeah.
Yeah, nowadays it would be. Back then you couldn't take a picture of anything or anything. I remember that. I mean, I'm sitting there and yeah, I'm like, it's ouch. Yeah, I probably still have scars from that. But well, John, thank you so much for your generosity with your time. This has been a really entertaining discussion that we've had. We covered a lot of territory, and I'm a big fan of your work, and I think the people that you bring on, it's very interesting. And again, I'll go back to when you hosted the fiction authors, that you just put that together and had that round table, which was awesome. I learned from it. So that's one of the things with podcasting, and also through, I guess, various social media, YouTube and things. You're a person that contributes knowledge base and inquisitive thinking and brings that to the forum, and I love that. So I'm a big fan. I'm really honored to have you on my show, and thanks for the earlier compliments. I'm 78 shows in, so I've kind of figured out some of the things, at least, like the audio and the video and stuff like that. And I've enjoyed it, and I do think it's a niche thing, safety, but when we bring in stories like this, it gets people to think about, okay, maybe reflecting upon things, even like lifestyle of minimalism, and what happens if I live in an area and my property values rise. Do I consider staying here or not? And what are the pros and cons? And then just what do I want to see from my own future, where I might want to live, where I might not want to live, what might change that, and stuff like that. So a lot for people to think about, and a lot of cool stories, and people can think of County Stadium every time they watch Major League. Yeah. And Ricky Vaughn. Yeah.
Wild thing.
Wild thing. What? It was right over the plate. What? Leave him out there a little bit. Let's see this. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. What was the guy name's Al Uke? What was the?
Euchre. Bob Euchre.
Yeah. Bob Euchre. Yeah. He was great. Great.
Today's game is brought to you by in papers. I don't know. Who the hell knows?
Post-game show is brought to you by Christ. I can't find it. The hell with it.
No one's listening anyway.
Yeah, this Clue Haywood, he's a convicted felon, isn't he? He's asking his colored man. He's like, I don't know.
It doesn't say here. This guy once hit his own son at a father. What is it? His own kid at a father-son game or something. Yeah.
Oh my God! Yeah, that was so cool.
That was great. The first Major League, great film. This is a great show, Dave. We've done movie reviews. We've got to tell bizarre anecdotes. We covered everything from the dangers of violating political correctness in your professional life to everything. It's been fun. No, I really did enjoy doing your show, and one of the reasons I think it's so great having these podcasts and the live streams that that I put on, and I'm on others, is I get to speak to highly intelligent people like yourself who have especially you very niche niche businesses and, experiences like that. And that's why I did, like you said, like the fiction was around. It was also just to get to talk to people who lived in, I think we were 3 or 4 different time zones, all at the same time, and, things like that. So that's why I love doing, on my show, when I do it, I do it just for me, it's just for fun, right? Maybe someday it'll be, but what did that guy call it? Like a side hustle stream or what,
Side hustle. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it'll somehow work into that. I don't know, but only if it's fun will I keep doing it. But right now I'm having a blast. I'm meeting great people, getting to know them better and better, and it's always fun. And it also lets me, talk too, because I like to. I don't, me. I sometimes never shut up. So.
Well, I enjoy the discourse and. So, John, once again, if you can tell people how to find you on Twitter, how to find you on YouTube.
Yeah, it's on Twitter. It's John_Steele99. Steele is spelled Steele 99. And on YouTube, it's just called John Steele Show, spelled the same way, just one word. Type that into the YouTube thing, and that'll bring you to my channel. And I've interviewed different people, and hopefully I'll have you, Dave, on sometime soon. We'll have something, yeah, because it's going to be very much a Q&A, though. Just so you know, like I'm very much into the interview thing, when I do it. So I like to be the interviewer guy, as you know. So
I would love to do that. And actually, once I have my book submitted, once it's finalized and submit it.
Yeah, I would like to read the book first, because when all my authors on, I made sure I read their works. Yeah. So I like to read the book, of your book, and then we'll plan it for we'll plan it for when your book is out there, and it'll be a good way to promote your book too. But just so you know, I read the book, so you're gonna have to be prepared, because I read. I'll pull up stuff from the people's read. I'll say, okay, on page 32, you said this, so I might, I won't be mean.
This has been the Safety Doc Podcast with author, radio show host, and leading safety expert, Dr. David Peroni. Remember to check back each week for the latest, best, and most bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. You can find Dr. Peroni on Twitter at SafetyPhD. And remember, the truth will keep you safe.